This is the Redeemer Forum, and it's, as I said earlier, the artist formerly known as Prince. This is the class formerly known as the Rector's class, but the Rector's not always in it, which was confusing, and I don't own it or have a title to it. So we thought, since many people come through this, the Redeemer Forum might be a better title for what really goes on in here. Today, I am taking my part in what I was assigned. And I was assigned in this series. This is our series on quiet miracles. And you wonder, well, quiet miracles as opposed to, that was my first question that I asked Father Chris when he gave me this title. I said, what is a quiet miracle? And he said, well, I don't know. I really wasn't thinking that hard when I came up with this series. And I said, okay, well, give me a little bit more than quiet miracle. And he said, I mean that they're sort of in the background. It's like white noise on the television. We're not really attuned to lots of miracles. The miracle stories in the Bible are sort of just there in our average daily life, I would argue. Now, maybe you contemplate the miracles of Jesus all day long. Good for you. I think it's good to do that, but I find most people don't. So that's why they're sort of quiet. It's not that the participants were quiet when these miracles occurred. And the first thing I want to do as we talk about miracles in the Bible is to quote a song that basically explains miracles in a complete nutshell. Do you remember the hit in 1975 by the Hot Chocolate? Do you remember, I believe in miracles? I believe in miracles. Where are you from, you sexy thing, you? I believe in miracles since you came along, right? And that pretty much sums up all you need to know about miracles. Because when the love of your life comes along, or think about your crush in high school, and you did nothing to deserve it, and perhaps you sort of channeled everything on earth to repel it. That is called a miracle, when he or she pays you a little attention. I still remember when Elizabeth McKee, prettiest girl in all of Linden, Alabama, I think she won Catfish Queen that year too. And that's quite a big deal in our area. That's a big deal. And the Catfish Queen, I remember once she looked at me walking down the hallway. And that was just enough. That was a miracle. And sort of when your heart gets to fluttering, and I didn't know anything to say to her, and we were sort of standing in the hallway next to each other. She was going this way, I'm going that way, and our eyes met, and she smiled and said, "Hi, Charleston." And I said, "I love chocolate milk." And she said, "Well, I do too." And that was the end of our conversation, but that was a miracle because she came along into my life, and I sort of was an awkward teenager, very late bloomer. Eric Mataxis, do you know that name? Eric Mataxis, yes, I knew you would, Father. Mataxis is an American author. I think technically he's Greek, so he's an American citizen, but I think his heritage is Greek, and I know he worships in an Episcopal church in New York, but he is technically a member of the Greek Orthodox Church. I don't think they let you go once they get you in. And so he's an author, a Christian. I wouldn't quite call it. Yeah, I'd say Christian apologist. He's a great writer. He has a radio show. He's written lots and lots of books. One book that he wrote a few years ago was called Miracles. We even had a book club. The book club took it up here. Linda Robinson and Gussie and who else? I remember it was a real big hit, and I read it along with the book club. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, they asked Mataxis. He wrote the sort of definitive book on Bonhoeffer, about that thick, and he's written one on Luther. Very good writer. You really should read it. Read Miracles. It's good. They asked him, What is a miracle? And he replied, well, that's not so easy to answer. I would say that there are two answers. They're equally true because it depends on what your definition is. And I kind of go with both in the book. One definition is anything that is an injection into the material world, into the universe of time and space from outside that world. So anytime anything happens in this world and you say it isn't possible to explain naturalistically, that can be a miracle. The parting of the Red Sea was not coincidence, he said. Jesus walking on water was not a hallucination. If those things actually happened, you can say those are miracles. But also, well, let me put it this way, he said. I say that those kind of miracles are God's way of speaking to us, trying to get our attention. And so that's a particular kind of miracle. So most of us, when we say something is a miracle, that's what we're talking about. We're not just talking about something amazing. We're talking about something amazing that actually involves God. We're typically talking about, I prayed for Uncle Jimmy and suddenly he could walk again. That's the kind of miracle we're typically talking about. And most of the miracles in my book are those kind of miracles. Now, today's miracle that I was given is the miracle involving the woman with the flow of blood. Or it's also in some places called Jesus' healing the bleeding woman. And it's in all three of the synoptic gospels, but St. Mark actually gives it the fullest account. And he's usually the briefest, but not today. He had an interest in this story. If you're a note taker, you can find it in Matthew 9, Mark 5, and St. Luke 8. And the incident, it's very interesting in St. Mark. It occurs while Jesus is traveling over to Jairus' house, where he's going to have another miracle that takes place. He's going to raise his dead daughter. But in the way over there, amid, St. Mark says, a large crowd, it says this: a woman was there who'd been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She'd suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch the hem of his garment, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from suffering. At once, Jesus realized the power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." The first question is, what's wrong with the lady? I think maybe that's my first question. What is wrong with the lady? I was just curious. 12 years of bleeding. Anytime somebody's bleeding is sort of fascinating. I was on an airplane this week coming back from Dallas, and because of the mask that you have to wear or go to prison for the rest of your life on the airplane or be thrown out midair. So I keep mine on. And because of the transfer of bacteria from my lunch, breathing up onto my nose, I got this pimple. And on the way home, I scratched it. I bet it bled for a half hour. And the flight attendant came over and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm allergic to masks." And she said, "Well, I'll give you some napkins you can put on under your mask." But she was fascinated just with that little bit. It just kind of kept bleeding and bleeding. I don't really know why. So why is this woman bleeding for 12 years? What's wrong with her? The woman's condition is not clear from the text. It doesn't say. There's some word choice that we can make some assumptions, but it doesn't say. In the old King James Version, it gets translated as an issue of blood. Not an issue like Houston, we have a problem, but blood coming forth, issuing forth. In scholarly language, she is referred to, in the original Greek, the word here is hamarhoisa, is what's translated bleeding woman, and that's some sort of hemorrhage, some sort of hemorrhaging of blood. The overwhelming majority of scholars say that it's basically her menstrual cycle is what it is. Now, 12 years, so a 12-year, we're adults here, ladies, a 12-year menstrual cycle. It may not be a menstrual cycle, but that's what the majority of scholars say, that she had a 12-year menstrual cycle, and she'd spent all her money trying to get rid of it, and it only got worse. And she went to the doctor, and it kept getting worse. There's nothing more frustrating than going to your doctor and realizing it's a practice of medicine. So, because of this continual bleeding, this is a bigger problem than even the problem. This problem comes with all sorts of problems, some that are obvious and some that are not so obvious. The obvious ones we don't even have to speak of. The not so obvious ones mean a big problem because in Jewish law, a menstruating woman or a bleeding woman is completely ceremoniously unclean. And in order to be clean in Levitical law, the blood, any kind of bleeding, must stop for 7 days. And this comes from a particular reading of Leviticus 15, if you want to read that later. Real titillating. Because of the constant bleeding, this woman lived in a constant state of uncleanliness, which would have brought upon her not only ritual impurity, but it meant that she was in social, relational, and religious isolation. Completely isolated. One of the parallels to being sick and isolated, until 18 months ago, when one was sick, one could practically have one's whole loved family in the hospital room. I'm not so sure that was that great, honestly. I think when you're in the hospital, you need to be in the hospital and be recovering and not really have a whole camp up there around a campfire. It's a very southern thing to do. So-and-so gets sick, half the town goes up there to see about her, and she's just trying to recover from a heart attack. She does not want guests. But with COVID coming around, as you know, when you go to the hospital, that's it. You're in there. And so you start to feel a little bit of what isolation is like, that you're cut off from even your family and your loved ones. You're even cut off, unfortunately, right now. I believe with the declining cases, again, we'll get to come back, but right now, the only priest who can visit you from Redeemer is Father Ralph, because he has the credentials to get in SMH he's on the official list, and they only allow one per parish. So, and that's just recently. Before that, it was none of us could come. So there's a little bit of a parallel there, and I'm not debating the efficacy of isolation during illness. I'm just trying to highlight the point of you can today kind of feel like what a little bit of isolation feels like when you're sick, and that's different than before. So she lived in social isolation, religious isolation, ritual isolation. She could not have been married. It would have prevented marriage the text doesn't say if she wanted to get married, we don't know. If she was married, it would have prevented her from having relations with her husband under Jewish law. And he could use this as grounds for divorce under the current law. So she's a total outcast. Is what's happened here. Total outcast. And I don't think any of us here maybe are total outcasts, but we've all felt some sort of outcasting in our lives because At some point, we felt isolated from others, whether by our own actions or by their actions towards us. And it has caused a heart sickness of sort. We've all been separated from something we love at some point. So in some maybe just small way, we might identify with this woman. There's maybe something in your life from which you've suffered for 12 years that you really want alleviated, and you really just have no idea how to go about it. And it's not quite this severe, but it comes up from time to time and sort of rattles you sometimes during the night, like Walker Percy and his night terrors. It sort of bothers you at 2:30 a.m., from 2:30 to 2:32, before the medicine kicks in and you go right back to sleep. But I want to do a little pivot here, because in this miracle, and in some miracles overall, this woman is healed physically and spiritually. It says, though, technically that her suffering was healed. It actually doesn't say. Now, most people think she was healed physically and spiritually and all, but it actually just says her suffering. Now, her anguish of being isolated may have been much worse even than the physical component. So, I don't know. Was it all of it, or was it just the emotional terror of being separated from her God, from her friends, from her family? I don't know. But what I want to pivot is the miracles don't tell us that we will always be physically healed this side of the Great Divide. But these miracles show us what it does look out. This one in particular shows us what it looks like to reach out, to have the courage to reach to Jesus in times of pain and at huge heartache and at moments of suffering and loneliness, and to receive the gift of God's presence in the middle of that. And don't ask me why, but it makes all the difference in the world. I spent 2 days in the hospital 3 weeks ago in Miami for an ear thing that I had that went crazy, and it was terrible. But I got to tell you, I prayed the whole time. Anytime there was a procedure, I knew Jesus was right there with me. I knew if anything came back that was really bad news, nothing was bad news other than you're not going to die from this, because you wanted to. It felt so bad. And there was no bad news, but had there been bad news coming through the door, I had Jesus right there with me. And I'm telling you, the ability to have him in the room with me, you'll be glad to know I'm not saying he came and sat down on the bed. Okay, right? But to have his presence in my heart truly made all the difference in the world. I sound like I'm at a sort of a campsite Bible study for newcomers, trying to tell you I had Jesus in my heart, but maybe Anglicans, Episcopalians ought to reconsider that prospect and get to know Jesus in our hearts, because I had him in my heart in there, in the middle of that, and felt fine in the bigger picture, which is so amazing. You can be right there just miserable as can be. They put me in a room, they called it for observation, and I quickly learned the position of that room was so I could observe all the noise going on outside of the room. I was the one doing the observation. And I was right by the nurse's station and the doctor's desk, and I know all the scoop about everybody at Mount Sinai Hospital in Miami. And I can tell you there's a nurse named Sabrina that is well loved. And her colleagues talk about her. But one doctor, Dr. Gonzalez, defended her character. And they walked down the hall and seemed to be just fine together. So I don't really know if it's all true. And what you can discover from reaching out to Jesus in the midst of a 12-year amount of suffering, what she discovered is that nothing, as St. Paul writes, nothing can separate us from the love of God revealed in Christ Jesus. This is not pie-in-the-sky stuff I'm talking about here. This is the miracle of God's presence in the midst of suffering that makes all the difference in the world. Michael Lindvall, he has wonderful small-town stories. He grew up in a small town in Minnesota or Iowa. He reflects this way. One personal affirmation in this biblical story is that beyond even physical healing, acceptance, intimacy, and touch can make us whole and give us peace. We are in fact shaped and made human in relationship to other persons and to God. Our relationships in the church, in friendships, in marriage are not just something extra added on to life for entertainment, as if we would be complete human beings in individual isolation. Relationship, touch, if you will, makes humans whole. And that is so true. Children in orphanages that are not held develop mental problems. Some even die from it. We know that touch is so powerful. Take positive touch. When Jesus heals and touches all the time, he's always touching and healing. Take the negative of that in our time and day. We know that inappropriate touch is powerful because it can kill and wreck and hurt people. Touch is tremendously powerful, and we were made for it. One of the hard parts of this dilemma, it's the simple passing of the peace. The passing of the peace, even for those who don't really like it, that is more than a time to sort of share recipes with one another. That's sometimes how I feel like it's going. It looks like somebody's going, 3 cups of sugar, yeah, just stir it. That's not really what the peace is for. The peace assumes that there's been some sort of conflict or brokenness in a relationship this week due to my sin or your sin or somebody else's, and that God has put that away, and that we're at peace with one another through the cross and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that touch ratifies that deal. And so here we are, all like Woodstock hippies in there doing the peace like this with no touch. And I miss it. I miss it so much more than I ever thought possible, to miss that human touch that is essential in our relationships. And relationships aren't added on for that entertainment value. They're at the core of who we are, and none more so than our relationship, our relatio with the Blessed Trinity. I think, to just sum up, healing may not always look like exactly what we were hoping for. But boiled down, the miracle of healing is, I would argue, basic connection with God, or reconnection, or rediscovery of the possibility of reconnection with God in a place that seems unconnected from God through His Son in the power of the Spirit. And that sometimes can come to us from a friend or a loved one in a moment of shame. Or, I have a friend I can actually call in Birmingham, and when I say, "You won't believe what I did," he starts laughing because he knows I'm capable of just about anything. And that's a good friend. And he provides when I've done something that's hurt somebody in Florida. He alleviates that for me and reconnects me through his, and we can do that, thank goodness, now over a cell phone, which is such a wonderful thing. Sometimes it's from a loved one in deep pain that draws us out and reminds us that we are of infinite value to God. I think the saddest pastoral situations that I see are situations where the person sees him or herself as having no value in God's eyes. And sometimes it's a matter of just figuring out how can we, through stories or talking or conversation or serving together, how can we just bring that back out so that you can know you're loved and infinitely precious in God's sight? How can we get reconnected? The miracle of connection and reconnection with God. I think it would be amazing today if you and I gathered up enough courage to reach out today and just touch the hem or the fringes of the garment of Jesus Christ in an area that we have lost connection, or an area we've thought, it's not really God's department, or an area of shame or sadness. And maybe we could even just take a whole handful of that garment and hold on and not let go. It turns out in the economy of grace, in that constant, that unmerited, undeserved, yet constant love of God given freely to unworthy sinners, it really turns out it only takes the fringe. Look what the fringe, just the fringe of the garment did for this woman. It only takes a mustard seed in the economy of grace to begin that could grow into a whole towering shrub. So that's my prayer for myself, following in this woman's footsteps, that I might just grab hold. And you know the old saying when you used to say, I'm just riding on his or her coattails, right? You know, you were existing on the largest of someone else. Let me let you in on a little secret. That's how it's supposed to be for Christians. We're just riding on his accomplishments, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Father, for all the many, many signs around us, open our eyes, open the eyes of our faith to your work in our lives, in our community, and around our world. Encourage us and inspire us to tune out the white noise in the background, that we might tune in to the gift of your presence, to these many signposts that indeed point us to our ultimate home. Give us grace and courage to reach out, to not be ashamed, to call indeed upon the great physician, even Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.